We're honored to have with us Itai Brun, Brigadier General in Reserves in the Israel Defense Forces. Under the auspices of Hoover's working group on Islamism and International Order with Itamar Rabinovich, he's produced this book, Israel Facing a New Middle East. He comes to us with a tremendous amount of experience in national security and military affairs in Israel. Most recently, he was head of the Israel Defense Intelligence in the for the Israeli Defense Forces. Before that, he was in charge of intelligence in the Israeli Air Force. Before that, he held a number of other senior positions. He's published a number of important works on national security and the Israeli military. In addition, he's trained as a lawyer with a degree in law from Haifa University and has studied for a master's degree in politics at Tel Aviv University. We're going to follow our standard format. I'm going to begin with a few questions that give Itai Brun an opportunity to lay out the essential argument of his book, and then we open up questions to the floor. So, again, welcome. Join me in welcoming Itai Brun to Hoover. So, this brief book, I think, provides, as Elliot Cohen says on the back of the book, as good a short introduction as you're going to find to Israeli thinking about national security strategy and even grand strategy. One of the things one learns from this short summary of Israeli thinking about grand strategy is that I think it will be counterintuitive for some of us. Israel doesn't do enough of such thinking, apparently, despite the many and varied military challenges it faces. So I thought we'd begin where Itai begins, in the opening chapters, giving us an account of the first and I think in some ways still most impressive effort to give an account of Israel's grand strategy, its military doctrine given the circumstances. And this was a paper that then Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion produced in the early 1950s. I wonder if you could lay out the essential pillars of Israel's original grand strategy.
First, I'm honored to be here. Concerning my career, it was always most of the time in the analysis issue. So not head of the intelligence, but head of the analysis division within the military intelligence, and also in the Air Force. So it's not the James Bond stuff, it's the analysis. Sorry. We are starting our journey through the Israel national security strategy with David Ben-Gurion's period, not only David Ben-Gurion, but the founding fathers of Israel's national security. And this is the story of, indeed, the formative years, and it's quite a famous story. In short, those founding fathers, and especially Ben-Gurion, who was, of course, leading them, they thought that it will take long time, if ever, to convince the Arab leaders to give up their desire to destroy the state of Israel after 48. So they understood, or they perceived, that it will take a series of rounds of military confrontation in order to eventually convince them to give up this idea. And to make it short, their concept was that they should end each and every one of these rounds with decisive military victory. This is one issue. On the background, and this is another important issue, they understood the threat to Israel as to the mere existence of the State of Israel. It was an existential threat. And when they had to build the military, they were looking for a concept. And the concept that was chosen was really a brilliant idea, and it suited this specific era. The idea was shifting the war into the enemy's territory. Usually it is connected with the lack of strategic depth, because Israel is so small, so it had to find a depth in the enemy territory. Then to this military, unequivocal, decisive victory that can be achieved only by moving into the enemy territory, destroying its forces, capturing its territory. But also the idea of the maneuver approach, the ground forces maneuver, which was in the center of this concept, was the type of battle that suited the Israeli soldier and mainly the Israeli commander. When you have to take decisions on the field very rapidly, this was the type of battle that suited the Israeli commander better than the other side, of course. There is a very famous writing of Dayan, of Moshe Dayan, prior to the Sinai campaign, when he explained what we currently know as information superiority or rapid decision-making, that the Israeli soldier is quicker than the other side. This is a mission command. They can take decisions on the field. The other side will have to go to upper echelon asking for advice or commands, so will advance. Until 1967, this concept, this idea of shifting the war into the enemy's territory worked. It was coined in our book. We're trying to make a distinction between the grand strategy, which is the existential threat, the need to end each and every war with a decisive victory, series of rounds, and so on. The third level is the military strategy. This is the idea of putting the emphasis on ground forces maneuver and so on. And the synchronizing middle level, what we call the national defense strategy, which was coined in this famous triangle: early warning, in order to mobilize the reserve, which are the main force for the ground forces maneuver, decisive victory, and deterrence, which is the outcome of this decisive victory, eventually will postpone the next round.
So it looks like that in the 1956 Sinai campaign and the 1967 Six-Day War, that Israel fought in accordance with Ben-Gurion's grand strategy. It was early warning, there was good intelligence, and there was decisive victory. But you and your co-author argue in this book with the tremendous victory. Actually, it was a tremendous victory before you were forced to retreat in 1956. A truly tremendous victory in 1967, but somehow that war, its consequences, and again, the war of 1973, you argue, caused Israel to begin to rethink its grand strategy, its national security doctrine.
Yes.
How so?
First, just quick comment. 56 and 67, to my opinion, is not a success by accident. So it's not just that they had the concept and they faced a war, they employed the concept and they won. Both 56 and 67, mainly 67, is in my opinion, is the outcome of their understanding concerning the concept. There is a famous story about the almost putsch between the military and the political level prior to 67 that led to the nomination of Moshe Dayan and so on. But the way I interpret this debate is the debate over the concept. From both sides, they understood the concept. They understood that if they will not attack in a preemptive attack, it won't work. So the concept, the debate was, what are the conditions in which this war should be initiated? So this is about 67. The first time when the Israeli concept, this working, successful concept meets different reality is in 68 in the war of attrition. This is a type of war in which the IDF was not able to shift the war into the enemy territory, though it tried to do it by the Air Force, but it didn't work.
Could you tell us a little bit about the essential predicament of the war of attrition? What was taking place? What was Israel's situation?
After 67, which was, no doubt about it, a huge decisive victory. And in a minute I'll refer to this image of such a decisive victory, what it caused in the Israel collective memory. But the other side, mainly the Egyptians, were of course shocked by the war, but immediately, after short duration of time, started to fire rockets through the Suez Canal. So Israel found itself in kind of war that was very stationary and quite opposite to the ethos of dynamism and going forward that always characterized the IDF. So they were in the posts along the Suez Canal, shooting by the Egyptians and cannot bring this war to an end. Eventually, it ended after the, by the way, it resembles things that are happening now, but the Soviet back then
Yes.
Came to Egypt with modern air defense. The Air Force couldn't cope with this modern air defense, and eventually with American negotiation, the war ended in August 70. But this was the first time the concept didn't work. Though the Israelis, for years, for example, it's a war, we call it a war without decoration. It was not viewed as a war. It was viewed as a deviation from normal wars. 67, I'm going back, the heritage of 67 is the right war in the Israeli memory, justified in its causes, short in its duration, low in its casualties, and very clear in its decisive outcome. The war of attrition was something else. And then the Yom Kippur War. I'm not going into details, but in Yom Kippur there are two things that we discuss. First is the failure of a triple failure. The grand strategy failure, the military failure, and in between the defense strategy failure. But 73 is important because the Israelis did not view 73 as something that is connected with problems within the concept. They thought that the concept is okay. They were surprised. There were some difficulties in employing the concept. The Air Force met the surface-to-air missiles. The armor corps that since 56 took the burden of shifting the war into the enemy territory, met the anti-tank guided missiles and so on. So Israel built in the years after the 73 a massive force in order to overcome these difficulties. But the importance of 73 is not with this.
It was understood in Israel as a failure of leadership, not of the doctrine.
No, failure of leadership, both in the political and the military level, and mainly failure of intelligence, the issue of surprise. So the intelligence was blamed. The early warning part of the concept didn't work, but the doctrine, the concept, was not questioned after 73. But according to our analysis, the importance of 73 is that it is a watershed in the way the Israeli society viewed war and its price. So eventually, since 73, if I'm going ahead, if 73 is the right war, the second Lebanon War in 2006, many Israelis view 2006 as a missed opportunity. Partly because the gap between the expectation in the beginning of the war and the way the war ended, partly because the huge gap between the image of the right war, which is still in the collective memory of the Israel, is the image of how war should be conducted and the war. But also because in 2006, Israel completely changed its military strategy, the third level, shifting from ground forces maneuver, mainly by the Armor Corps, to firepower using Air Force and so on. We connect this shift with the change in the way the Israeli society view war, its prices, and so on.
Yes, and let's back up a little too. You connected to changes in Israel, but you also connected to two changes outside of Israel. You emphasized the creation of organizations, an organization in 1982 in Lebanon called Hezbollah, and an organization created in 1988 in the Gaza Strip called Hamas. How do those contribute with changes in Israeli society to lead to changes in Israel national security doctrine or the strategic environment?
Yes. We connect. Those organizations are, as you said, the outcome of the 80s. By the way, also Al-Qaeda. Hezbollah, 82, Hamas, 87, December 87. It's on the start of the first Intifada. The Sheikh Yassin, the late Sheikh Yassin, is taking his Muslim Brotherhood cell and transform it into Hamas movement, and then Al-Qaeda in 88. They are the product, they are the outcome of the 80s. We connect them in our analysis with what can be called the previous upheaval in the Middle East. A series of dramatic events that occurred between 79 to 82, the Islamic Revolution in Iran, the beginning of the Iran-Iraq War, the Israeli invasion into Lebanon, the first Lebanon War, the start of Iran-Iraq War I mentioned, and also the Soviet invasion into Afghanistan. So those four events really shook the Middle East. The states went one step back, and the organizations came into the stage. Now, they analyzed the reality as it was viewed during the 80s and the 90s, and came out with two really very interesting analysis. First, they understood that Israel have technological superiority over them. That cannot be questioned. Israel has missiles and aircrafts and submarines and satellites and everything. So the technological superiority is not disputable. Israel has technological superiority over them. But they also acknowledge that Israel has weaknesses and vulnerabilities, and they understood that attacking those weaknesses and vulnerabilities can offset the technological superiority. So they build a concept, and this is the concept that Israel is facing in the last 2-3 decades, and also the United States in the battlefields of Iraq and Afghanistan. First, they understood that they have to dramatically increase their survivability, absorption capability. Tunnels going into civilian neighborhoods, civilian buildings, spreading the forces, low signature forces, weapon system, and so on. So this is the idea of survivability. Then they understood that they should increase their deterrence capability. First, general deterrence, that Israel will not attack them. And then, if this general deterrence failed, shifting the war to more convenient areas to them. And eventually, and this is very impressive, the idea of winning goes back to the war of attrition, the idea of winning through attrition and not through military decision, understanding that Israel cannot stand long duration of war with lot of casualties, trying to cause this type of war, which was translated by both Hamas and Hezbollah to the idea of winning by not losing. There is a famous speech by Nasrallah of Hezbollah that says that as long as we are still shooting, as long that we are firing rockets, we are winning, taking from the Israelis those images of decisive victory that are part of their understanding of how war should be conducted. So in the last few decades, these are the decades where I was in the IDF, Israel was facing this type of organizations with this concept, with the weapon systems that are serving this concept, rockets, mortars, suicide bombers, missiles, and so on. This, of course, this concept does not meet the old Israeli military concept of shifting the war into the enemy's territory, partly because they are different from the old generation of enemies, the states, and partly because the Israeli society, at least as it's viewed by the decision makers in the political and the military echelons, Israel cannot stand this massive ground maneuver with its lots of casualties.
On either side, on both sides?
On both sides. So Israel understood the new rules of war. You should not kill too many and try not to be killed too much. So,
this change begins, you argue in the book, after the 1973 war?
Yes, but only Israel understood it during the 90s. The change was there. The two famous operations in which the change was already seen was 93 Operation Accountability and 96 Operation Grape of Ruth. These are two major firepower operations in Lebanon, where for the first time Israel met a threat and did not employ its ground forces, but preferred to use its firepower by missiles and artillery. So the change was there. We are tracing it back to the 70s and to the 80s, while there was an intellectual debate within the IDF and within the security, the defense community, concerning whether we should change our traditional offensive ground maneuver doctrine. But the actual changes happened, and I think it took us time to understand. These are ideas, and ideas are very difficult, of course, to trace, and they are very difficult to be implemented. So in a way, what we are trying to do in the book is not to read the articles and the speeches, but to try to analyze what really happened when Israel went to war. And in 2006, 96, and 93, and then in 2008 and 2014, Israel preferred to operate its firepower mainly by the Air Force, and was very hesitated in employing its ground forces.
Yes, and you take us through other moments, the first Lebanon War, first Intifada, the second Intifada, but you treat the second Lebanon War, July 2006, middle of July 2006, middle of August 2006, as a kind of watershed. Could you walk us through the debate in Israel, that the conduct of that war, and explain how that reflects either, depending on how you want to put it, the new doctrine or the new confusions that Israel faced? Because I remind everybody that was, I suppose all the wars were, this was an especially controversial war, especially its conduct. Even after the war, you point out that on the one hand, many people immediately following the Second Lebanon War, pronounced it a failure, and yet it produced 10 years of relative quiet, seemingly achieving that general deterrence that Israel seeks. So again, if you could walk us through the conduct of 2006, explain the controversies and how it reflects the new doctrine, the new situation.
Yes. We are emphasizing this already more than 10 years of quiet. There is a debate also on this issue. There is a school of thought that says that it has nothing to do with deterrence. It has to do with Hezbollah's interests. And by the way, since 2011, it's a good question whether it's only the deterrence and not the things that Hezbollah is doing other places. 2006 is important because I think for the first time the Israeli public faced this gap between the expectations. At the end, Hezbollah is not such a mighty force. These are a few thousands of warriors with then. Now they have a different arsenal, but then they had a limited number of rockets. And the Israeli public, as well as the military itself and the political level, were disappointed by the fact that Israel was not able to make this rapid, decisive victory in a lightning war. I think that what we learned from there is that two things. First, it's really difficult. This new concept of absorption, deterrence, attrition, where they are spreading all over. They don't have centers of gravity. They are, I call it a strategy of disappearance. You don't see them. They are not there. It's very difficult for the IDF to cope, even when you know where they are most of the time, and Gaza is a perfect example for that. This was emphasized in 2014, but also in 2006. When you know where they are in hospitals, civilian buildings, and you can't attack there because of those new rules of war that we discussed previously. But I think that what Israel find out, and it is usually attributes associated with Gadi Eisenkot, currently the Chief of General Staff, and back then the head of the operational branch, and after that the commander of the Northern Command. And this is something that is called the Decisive strategy.
A very, very controversial.
A very controversial one. But in its basics, it's the idea that in a way, the IDF is replacing this idea of decisive victory with a massive blow, a massive attack on these sub-state organizations, their structure, their military capability, their command and control disposition, their missile disposition, and so on. And eventually, I think, to my opinion, eventually this concept is working. It worked in 2006, it worked in 2014, at least till now. It makes lots of frustration because of this gap between the way the war is conducted in 2014 for 51 days, in 2006 for 33 days, not 100 hours as in 56, not 6 days as in 67. That's a huge difference. And you don't have this image of an unequivocal and decisive victory, undisputable. But it brings about times of quiet. And in that sense, I think the other side, Hezbollah, Hamas, also acknowledge, also understand by now that their concept, this dirt triangle of survivability, absorption, deterrence, attrition, it worked quite well 18 years of fighting Israel while it was in Lebanon, all on low-intensive conflict.
Yes.
It worked very well in Gaza till 2008, till the disengagement in 2005. But in high-scale operation, eventually the side with the technological superiority, the stronger side in their view, is utilizing its force in a way that caused them huge damage. It usually does not affect the current war because they keep on fighting, but it brings about those times of quiet after the operation.
So let's talk a bit now about the three Gaza operations that followed the Second Lebanon War. 2008, Kasled, 2012, Pillar of Fire, 2014, Sukeitan. I forget how...
Protective edge, I think.
Protective edge.
Yes.
There, unlike in Lebanon, you didn't get 10 years of quiet after 2008. You've had years of rocket fire from Gaza. Why did you get quiet after forcefully attacking infrastructure, command control centers in Lebanon, but yet in Gaza you were forced to re-enter every couple of years?
First, good question. I'm not sure we have the answer. It's always the outcome of specific context of elements. But after 2008 and after 2012, we had times of quiet. But it was not the total quiet of the current period since 2014. There will be people that will say that maybe 2008 and 2012 were not strong enough. And 2014 was Israel operated its force in a way that was much more effective. I'm not sure about it. It's also connected, this massive blow, this way of operating our force also met the new Middle East of after the upheaval, and in a way 2014 was totally different than 2008 and mainly 2012.
I think you quote the new defense minister Lieberman as saying the next Gaza operation will be the last Gaza operation.
Yeah, that was, I'm not sure, but I think that this was, no, I think it was after he took his position. Prior to that, he has much more extreme quotation, but I think it reflects the way the Israel wants to see future operations. And it will always be the outcome of future specific context. I'm not sure there will be the last war in Gaza, of course.
So you've already mentioned Gadi Eisenkot. In the book, you write about a paper he published. He was the chief of staff in 2015 on IDF Strategy. And there you emphasize that he's taking account of the new strategic circumstances. The new strategic circumstances in the new Middle East require a security doctrine that deals seriously not only with the military dimension of war, but the economic, political, and legal dimensions of war. You also emphasize the need, this goes back to some comments you've made before, to take account of questions of the domestic legitimacy of operations and the international legitimacy. Tell us about how in Israel the leadership is thinking about these non-military dimensions of national security doctrine, economic, political, legal.
This publication, military strategy, the IDF military strategy, is in a way the outcome of more than a decade and a half of discussions within the IDF. And according to the Israeli unique structure, it's a very ambitious document because unlike the American procedure where you have the presidential national security strategy, the Pentagon national defense strategy, and then the national military strategy, in Israel we have only the national military strategy, and we don't have no written, and in a way it does not exist. Sometimes exists, sometimes not, the upper level. So General Eisenkot is writing his strategy or the IDF strategy without the upper echelons. So he's trying to communicate with them, to give them his approach on how the IDF should be operated. The main contribution, I think, of this new document, and it's unique in that sense, that it was published to the public, is by two distinctions that are highly connected with what you asked. First, Eisenkot is pointing an innovation that was made through the IDF, and it's a poor translation into English, but it's the war between the wars, or the campaign between the wars. After the 2006, the IDF adopted, Gabi Ashkenazi, then the Chief of General Staff, adopted the Clausewitzian distinction between two stages, war and preparing to war. Eisenkot is adding a third stage, preparing to war, war, and war between the wars, now, or campaign between the wars. And this is communicating with many things that we said, because with this new battlefield, with this new environment, deterrence is sometimes replaced by this effort trying to deter, but also to dismantle elements or to deny, for example, Hezbollah to receive advanced weapons or so on that will be used in future operations. So in the campaign between the war, in the war between the wars, it's not only military operations, it's multi-dimensional operations. The IDF is doing things on the field, covertly, overtly, but it's also a campaign about legitimacy. It's also a campaign about the economic situation. There is currently a huge debate about Gaza, which the IDF has its statement, its position about the economic situation in Gaza and the way it is contribute or not contribute to escalation. The other very interesting distinction is that Eisenkot is describing two posts, since he doesn't have the upper echelon, so he's assuming that the political level might ask the IDF for different two achievements. The first is the old decisive victory with unequivocal results and so on. And the IDF should be prepared for this kind of campaign. But the other is a new one. And in that sense, it gives the theory for 2006 and 2008 and 2014, telling the public and the political level that here we won't have this decisive victory, partly because you don't want to pay the price of this decisive victory. And in this kind of campaign, it's again, first, it's not usually we have to think about, we used to think about, and Israel, this was something that was fixed in the Israeli thinking, the IDF should bring about a military achievement, then the political level will take this achievement and negotiate with the other side. This happened in 49 in Rhodos and in the other wars. First you have the war, and then in the 101 kilometers after the Yom Kippur War, Israel and Egypt met and negotiated on the terms. In the current environment, the political effort and the military effort goes together. When you are fighting in Gaza, the political and the military level should be synchronized, offering something to the other side while attacking, or stopping the attack while they are thinking or doing different. While doing so, it's not only military, of course, it's also economic and legal and all the other elements of current strategic operations.
So if you don't mind, if I could make explicit a point you were making about the cost of decisive victory. That is, it seems to observers that Israel, of course, could achieve decisive victory in southern Lebanon in the Gaza Strip. But what's that price that Israel is not willing to pay? It seems like thousands or tens of thousands of civilians dead on the other side and hundreds of Israeli soldiers dead. Is that and that creates a problem, I presume, both of domestic legitimacy. Is the Israeli public willing to pay that price, and international legitimacy? Are those the costs that you were concerned about?
You're referring to the numbers?
I'm referring to the numbers, both for decisive victory in Lebanon and decisive victory in Gaza.
I don't know. The numbers are
right. The numbers don't
the
large.
Numbers, but Israel. We are now entering a very problematic area of perceptions. So first, I must emphasize that it's a perception. When Israel faced that during the 90s, I totally agree. During the 90s, because of the Lebanese mud, because of Gaza, because of other issues, and because of this changing in the attitude of the Israeli society toward war, and in the 90s, many things happened concerning the confidence of the Israeli public with its military and political leadership, especially concerning the military. But having said that, the military leadership and the political leadership thought, this is a perception, that Israel, the society, will not be willing to pay the price of war, of all type of war with lots of casualties, and also that the world will not give us legitimacy if we will have many casualties in the other side. As long for the Israeli casualties, when Israel, and I think that this is still the basic assumption, and you are right in your description, not about the numbers essentially, but the general perception. But in the second Intifada, when Israel, many Israelis were thinking that they are fighting for their homes, they are fighting for the state of Israel, in a different kind of war, but in a way existential, that goes to their cities, buses, houses, and so on. Israel suffered more than 1,000 casualties and keep on fighting. So I'm not sure it is always connected with the threat you are facing. In Gaza and in Lebanon, the Israeli society, the Israeli military, and the Israeli leadership, I think they were thinking that the threat is not of the type that this number of casualties in both sides is needed. And I think the Israeli society viewed the same, and probably we thought that the international community will also view the same. But I'm telling the story of the second Intifada to say that there will be type of wars, I think, when the Israeli public will be willing to pay the price.
Perhaps there's some questions. Michael.
Thank you for your presentation. Two questions. First, how does Iran figure in Israeli strategy? And second, and relatedly, how do you envision, if you do envision such a thing, the next war with Hezbollah being fought? And is it possible that in such a war, given the enormous firepower in rocketry that Hezbollah has accumulated, and given the vulnerability of those rockets, the vulnerability of Israeli population centers to those rockets, is it possible that in such a war, Hezbollah would do enough damage to Israeli population areas that Israel as a whole, meaning the IDF, the political level, and the public, would decide that Israel had no choice but to occupy Lebanon?
Yes. As for the first question, I think that Israel view Iran in three different but connected capacities. First, with its nuclear ambitious, Iran was planning and acting in order to pose an existential threat to Israel. And this is concerning the nuclear issue. So this is one hat. As a source of existential threat or future existential threat. The second is the generator of most of the bad things that are happening in the neighborhood concerning terror, smuggling, armament, weapons, and so on. And the third, which is demonstrated in the last few years and of course in the current period, it's a major regional actor with regional ambitions. So Israel is, I think, dealing with Iran in those three realms. Currently, the nuclear threat probably was postponed because of the nuclear deal with Iran. Many Israelis are arguing concerning the deal, but I think that the general understanding is that currently they are playing by the deal, and that probably it was all the options that were on the table were bad options, and this probably is the less bad. The deal was probably the less bad option. Concerning the other two heads of Iran, Israel is keep on fighting Iran or dealing with Iran, trying to lessen its regional influence and trying to lessen its activity concerning terror and delivery of armament and so on. Concerning possible war with Hezbollah, I think that your description is quite correct for both sides. So I think that Hezbollah's capability to inflict damage toward Israel is higher than in 2000, much higher than in 2006, and higher in objective terms. But also Israel's capability to inflict pain and damage to Hezbollah. And in a way, our previous description of the quiet was not comprehensive enough, because there are two sides for that. I think that Hezbollah is deterred. The reason for more than 10 years of quiet in our northern border is not only because Hezbollah is deterred by Israel based on his experience of 2006, is also that in a way Israel is also deterred in a way that he doesn't want the third Lebanon War. So it's a kind of a mutual deterrence. And this is why I think that the two sides will do a lot to avoid the situation that you described. If it will happen, I cannot give you the answer. everything, of course, is possible. I think that Israel will try to do many things prior to occupying Lebanon or certain territory of Lebanon. It has a bad experience from 18 years of presence on Lebanon soil. I think that part of the Eisenkot strategy is innovative concept that will inflict damage and pain to Hezbollah without occupying territory for a long duration of time. But it's an option, and the IDF is preparing for that, of course. By the way, Hezbollah, on his side, all this discussion, I think it resembles almost exactly the way the leadership of Hezbollah and the leadership of Israel is thinking about possible future war. Hezbollah, since 2011, is publicly announcing the possibility that his troops will penetrate the Galilee, will penetrate the border, will go inside Israeli soil, in Israel territory, unlike in 2006. There is a fight in YouTube movies describing this future operation of Hezbollah, but I think it's for real. It's the way they think about it. It's another way to inflict pain, creating disorder among within Israel, among the Israel, in order to create this mutual deterrence. But it's of course a possibility.
Is Hezbollah building tunnels?
I don't know. We should assume that yes, though the terrain in Lebanon is quite different than in Gaza. But it's of course a possibility.
Stanley Hoover. I'd like to ask you about the implications of the attack on the Temple Mount the other day, in particular because these were Israeli Arab citizens. These were not people who came from the West Bank. These were people who had Israeli citizenship. And they were, in effect, committing suicide. They knew, it's extremely doubtful they thought they would survive that attack. So the question is how widespread this is. In Israel's previous wars, the domestic Israeli Arab population did not oppose Israel's military efforts. Is something changing here? I was reading an account this morning from the city where they grew up. The parents, the mayor, we don't understand what was happening. But you talk to the younger people, something is changing. The sense of, Al-Aqsa is in danger, and they felt compelled. And how widespread this is.
Well, the whole neighborhood is becoming more radical and more extremism. I can't give you, I don't know, I can't give you, and I'm coming from many years of trying to be accurate. And I always had the privilege, in a way, of dealing with enemies outside Israel's border. So I'm not viewing myself as an expert for what is happening inside. Generally speaking, I think that the Arab citizens of Israel are citizens of the state of Israel, but as in any other groups, there are people that are radicals. It was not the first time that such a thing is happening, but I can give you details about the level of extremism. It seems to me that it's not something that describes the society. I'm sure about it, but I don't know.
Hello, Fratkin. First, thanks very, very much for your remarks. They were very interesting, and I look forward very much to reading the book. The question I have is a reflection, I think, of something Peter said earlier and that Michael Mandelbaum said, and concerns what you very well described as the change in the battlefield, which has deprived Israel of certain advantages it had in earlier wars, taking the war to the enemy and so forth. And you now find yourself in a situation where things are often fairly static, basically, Gaza, South Lebanon. What I was wondering was, is there some, would it be, in your opinion, is there some way to restore that maneuverability? And what I have in mind is something that seemed to have arisen at the time of the 2006 war in Lebanon. There were people, I think, who said the way to deal with Hezbollah in South Lebanon is to attack their, so to speak, back office in Syria. Of course, the real back office is in Iran. But I was wondering whether that, of course, the argument at the time was something like, well, that will widen the war, and widening wars for some reason is always thought to be bad, although I'm not sure that's absolutely should be definitive. But I was wondering whether that does enter into the strategic thinking that you are, or the exercise that you're involved in.
In 2006, in a way, in the first day of 2006, in July 12th, they entered the room in the cabinet meeting. It was all published in the Vinograd Commission of Inquiry report, so everybody can read. But they were entering the room with three different concepts of what should be done. And the problem, in a way, and this is my main lesson, and, even though sometimes you have the lessons, you cannot always work according to those lessons for known reasons. But the main lesson is that it was probably the first time that they were discussing the different approaches. It was a new government. It was, in a way, a new chief of staff. All of the team, Olmert was few months in his position, took over Sharon in January 2006. Amir Peretz was a new defense minister. Chalutz was chief of general staff since 2005, but most of his time he was dealing with the disengagement and with the territories, and suddenly Hezbollah kidnapped, we know now, murder and then kidnapped about the 3 soldiers in the Lebanese border, and they entered the room. And they have 3 different concepts. Meir Dagan, the former head of the Mossad, said we should attack Syria because this is the back offices and so on. Chalutz, the chief of general staff, says, according to a concept that was built in the Air Force for many years, it's not Hezbollah. You are falling into their hands when you are calling them Hezbollah. This is Lebanon. It's a state. And we know how to fight a state, so let's fight Lebanon. Of course, there are people there who call themselves Hezbollah, but it's a responsibility of a state. So we should attack the infrastructure of the state. We know how to deal with states. And eventually, Amir Peretz, the defense minister, said, we'll go after Hezbollah. And this was the decision. By the way, a very surprising decision. That was the third option. We'll go directly Syria, Lebanon, and Hezbollah. And Amir Peretz, and it surprised the military because the plan that was offered to the political level was meant to inflict not so little casualties in the other side, because of the rockets, the missiles were concealed in houses, buildings, and Amir Peretz approved. Eventually, the casualties were less than anticipated. But this was the decision that was taken. The three schools of thought still exist. Chalutz, for example, this is the anniversary day for the war in Lebanon. He just made an interview I read 2 or 3 days ago, saying that the government, the cabinet, should allow me to attack the state of Lebanon. And the second Lebanon would look totally different. I think that these three elements are valid, and of course the combination of them and what you emphasize is, again, we cannot plan or decide it now. We should build the capability, and then when it happens, due to the specific context, we should take the decision. Israel should take the decision. The important issue is that in war games, simulations, in discussions, you develop these options and the combinations of the options. But as it is said around here, all of them are on the table, of course.
We have time for one more brief question.
Thank you, General, for your service. My question is, Hezbollah, the structure of Hezbollah, is not about cyber security, drones that they have, or missiles, but the structure. And like, for example, like assassinating or killing like Imad Mughniya, that's a big victory for Israel's state. Is there like a continuous, like selective targeting leaders in Hezbollah that, that's, I think, will slow Hezbollah? I believe it's a big, huge like they have organizing and how can I say, leadership is not only Nasrallah, like Nasrallah out of the picture. There will be Naim Qasim, there will be others. And my second question is to see Prince Turkey, meeting Major General, I believe, Yakov, in May, and that's something in public. What do you think of like Israel? Like, this is something unnormal, like to see Saudis getting closer, like, and Saudi is a major country in the Arab world, like, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, when talking about Iran.
Concerning the first question, I think the way we put it in our book is saying that according to what is usually called in Israel foreign publication, we are connecting those foreign publications with this concept presented in Eisenkot document concerning the war between the wars, the campaign between the wars. So I don't know, but it seems that those kind of things are happening. For the second question, first of all, the Middle East is dramatically changing, and I'm the other book that I wrote since my retirement was about intelligence analysis. And the main thesis of this book is that you cannot predict the future. You can help decision makers think about the future. So in a way, to me, everything is possible. And those new connections, and it's obvious that Israel share many interests with the Sunni Arab states, some of them. But to me, I think that the cooperation in the current Middle East, the cooperation that probably exists, has some kind of mirror glass or upper level, which at least currently the cooperation cannot penetrate. And this is why what you see in public is probably Turkey, the retired prince, and General Amidror, the retired national security advisor, and not key figures from the current political level in the two countries. But the interests are there, and there are mutual interests. But I think the level is not only what you can making public, it's also for actual things that currently I think cannot be done, but maybe in the future.
With that, I want to say it's no small achievement to speak about the Middle East and Israeli national security doctrine with sobriety and measure and incisiveness. Itai has accomplished that in speaking to us, and he's accomplished that in this book. I urge you all to read it. Itai, thank you very much.
Thank you.